Before we go into this bonus topic, spoiler warnings for Chainsaw Man Part 2. If you are interested in reading Chainsaw Man, I think it is a pretty good manga myself, and you want to read it spoiler-free, I'm going to count down to 10, and that's how long you have to click off of this stream. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so, over the past week, two very interesting things have been happening on the internet that have caught my attention. The first is the release of Chainsaw Man Chapter 167, featuring this excellent panel that you now see in front of you. The second is the Smol Lola situation, and I'll explain what that is in a bit. But not only the Smol Lola situation, but Elara's interview of Smol Lola. Spoiler, Malcolm, thank you for the super chat. Denji got a hand. Yeah, we'll get into that. So, to explain what each of these situations are, essentially, this week, a new Chainsaw Man chapter released, which basically featured the protagonist getting a hand job with, again, dubious consent from a girl possessed by a demon, right? Essentially, this is me dumbing it down like a lot for people who have never read Chainsaw Man. So essentially, the protagonist gets a hand job from someone who's possessed with dubious consent throughout the entire thing. And Twitter really honed in on the idea of it having dubious consent, right? Because as Twitter is wont to do, they took one part of this, like, you know, they reduced all of the nuances, all of the plot points that were going on in this part of the story, and dumbed it down to only one issue. That issue being dubious consent. And the argument came up about whether this was actually a depiction of SA. Shinji move and Lola was nothing burger? Tortilla? Yeah, but there are some lessons that I do want to extract from both of those situations. So the first thing that happened was a lot of people were starting to dogpile on Fujimoto, the creator of Chainsaw Man, by saying that he was platforming SA or something along those lines. They were up in arms about the fact that this author who made a story that they loved so much dared to portray such an awful experience. And this brings up something very fundamental that I really do feel like people on the internet are becoming less and less aware of, which is that platforming something, depicting something, is not the same thing as promoting or condoning it. While this was all going on in the same week, we had the whole Smol Lola situation. Essentially, for those who didn't keep up with it, and honestly, if you didn't, I don't blame you, this indie VTuber, this small creator, went about, and this is my personal judgment on what went on, by the way, decided to launch a self-promotion campaign where she made her model very similar, and she made her mannerisms very similar to ShyLily's. And this sparked a whole controversy that lasted several months about plagiarism and, well, the ethics of having a character model and character persona that was dangerously close to another creator's. Now, dolphin bit. Anyways, in addition to that, Elara decided to host an interview with Smol Lola where she could get, Smol Lola's side of the situation. And when Elara announced that interview, you had a lot of people coming in from the side criticizing that decision. Giving a platform to people who get caught doing backhanded things makes you complicit to their rage baiting just for views. You're only helping that person grow and gain more sympathy points from an incredibly impressionable and easily manipulated community. Respect levels down. So here's the thing. A lot of people criticized her in the same ways, where they equated platforming Smol Lola to defending or condoning or promoting her as well. And again, that's an assumption that I want to push back against. So, the first thing that kind of bothers me about this assertion is that it really infantilizes the audience. people are not nearly as gullible as takes like this tend to portray them as. I mean, I'm pretty sure that if you're over 18 years old, you do have the critical thinking capacity to look at Smol Lola's model, hear her voice on stream, and conclude that, yeah, the imitation is a little blatant. However, the fundamental thing that I want to get across is that promoting something and platforming something are two different things. With a catch, but we'll get into what that catch is later. But essentially, just because when you're deciding whether something counts as platforming or whether something counts as promotion, or actually even simpler than that, when you're deciding if something is promotion or not, there are two things you need to take into consideration. First is the intentions behind why that person was platformed, and two, the outcome of platforming them. Only after you've taken these two things into account would you be in a position to decide if something is actually if something is actually promotion versus just platforming. Now, Asehara, nah, we are past that point. We have adults that don't understand critical thinking. I guess you're right with that. That is, yeah. Although I do feel like they're mostly concentrated on Twitter, though. I feel like if you use Twitter as a metric to gauge whether that is the case in the general population, you are going to get a little bit of a skewed representation, because Twitter itself as a platform is designed to discourage critical thinking. So, a few things with Elara's interview. Now, with the interview itself, the intentions behind it. Several times throughout the interview, and several times after the interview, she has explicitly stated that the purpose behind her interview was to reaffirm, one, that civil discussion is important regardless of how controversial a topic is, and two, that everyone deserves to have a say, or at least get to say their piece, before having judgment passed on to them. And again, these are two messages that I think most of us can get behind. However, admittedly, there were some parts of this interview where, as a result of, I guess, inexperience and maybe even a little bit of naivete, people would have assumed that she wasn't really, quote unquote, going hard on Lola. A lot of these things I would put down to like inexperience. I think Elara did say this was her first time interviewing someone live. So these were things like not turning off sound alerts, taking questions from chat instead of having a pre-prepared list that you made yourself. Because, again, as an interviewer, I want to stress that it is very important, and it is part of ethical interviewing, that you make your subject comfortable with speaking. And Elara definitely succeeded at that. Or you could tell while watching the interview that she was trying really hard to do that. And as a result, she was exceedingly nice to Lola while she was on stream. The problem was, that kind of conflicted with what people, I guess, wanted out of that interview, or what some people wanted out of that interview. Because what Elara essentially did, right, is she gave Lola a platform to talk about the situation from her own perspective. And what ended up happening was she just held up a mic to Lola while Lola smeared mud all over herself. But the point in the interview, or at least the version that she posted on YouTube, where Lola's defense really starts to collapse in on itself, only happens at around 45 minutes, where it becomes really obvious. So as a result, you have that first 45 minutes where it just looks like Elara's being nice. And I want to stress as well that the questions that Elara were asking were not easy questions to answer. But I feel like a lot of people might have thought that she was a little too gentle with the way that she was asking them, because a minority of those questions came from chat rather than from Elara. The second thing is that people were expecting this interview to be more like this, where she would bring Lola on stage, really rip into her, tear her defense apart, etc., etc. And again, I feel like people wanted this as a form of catharsis because they viewed Lola as getting away with an act of plagiarism when it comes to her method of self-promotion. And I want to make this very clear. Elara herself expressed that by the end of the interview, she didn't believe what Smol Lola was saying about this whole thing being unintentional, but she did go into that interview willing to believe that what Smol Lola was doing was not a deliberate attempt to create controversy and self-promote that way. Again, that is an admirable assumption to have, especially if you're an interviewer, because as an interviewer, you never want to walk into an interview while already conceiving of your interviewee as the enemy, right? That's something you'd never want to do. But again, I can see why some audiences would not have that same assumption going into the interview. I myself will not have that same assumption, but that's mostly because I've studied journalism and I'm very painfully aware of how viable controversy is as a method of promotion. So essentially, the way that I would view this, and the way that a lot of people view this, was that Smol Lola played a stupid game and won a stupid prize, where this was a deliberate attempt at garnering promotion for her upcoming VTuber 2.0 debut or something like that, or at least a chance to get her name out there. And the thing is, what Lola was doing was most definitely, in my opinion, promotion. But what Elara was doing was just platforming. Because by the end of this stream, I mean, if you try and search up how Smol Lola's doing right now, I'm pretty sure her social media has been nuked. And I think the last thing that we were able to see from Smol Lola was her saying that she was considering graduating. So right off the bat, the intentions behind this act of platforming was not really oriented around promotion of the person, but rather the reaffirming of some important values when it comes to online discussion. The second thing is that, well, the outcome of it, because Lola self-destructed so hard during the interview, completely without any pushing from Elara, by the way. I think Elara gave her, like, the gentlest experience that you can expect when you're going in having done what you have as a promotional strategy. But yeah, Smol Lola essentially self-destructed, and the outcome of that is that she's pretty much back to square one when it comes to establishing an online presence. Tortilla, buried by their own arguments if they did wrong. Yeah. So, did Elara ever ask Lola about where the idea for her mod's design came from? I think she did, and one of the most damning things that Lola said during the interview was, "I don't watch ShyLily, but ShyLily was a huge inspiration for my model." And that is just a very long way of saying, I yoinked her design, even though I don't know her as a creator, and I don't know her content. So again, not a great look. And here's the thing, right? When it comes to promotion and platforming, there is overlap between the two, but in actuality, this is what that overlap looks like. Even though a lot of people will assume that they are automatically the same thing all the time, that's not actually the way that it works. Lamau, she pulled a Kanye. Yeah, pretty much. So, on one hand, you have, pure promotion. This is what Smol Lola was doing with her social media presence on her social media accounts, where it's just about getting your name out there, just about projecting a certain image, and trying to entice an audience to engage with you. In between the two, when you have platforming and promotion that overlap completely with one another, you have the basic functions of a lot of social media websites or a lot of social media platforms like Twitter, like Insta, like, well, I guess Reddit. And the simplest form, that is platforming and promotion all at once, is the reposting or sharing function, where you're basically putting something onto your platform, but without mediating it or without adjusting the way that people see it at all on your own. And then on the other side, where it's just platforming and not promotion, you have Elara's interview, where, again, she was just showcasing an example of what was going on, through the lens of an interview, through the lens of posing questions and then waiting for responses. So again, a lot of people will instantly assume that this instantly gets put into here or instantly gets put into here, where in actuality, that's not really the case. However, she was full-blown manic in the moment she received any minute a minute ounce of criticism. I will admit that during the interview, Smol Lola didn't appear to be like... She didn't really appear interview ready because, well, I mean, that's kind of apparent from the outcome of the whole thing, but yeah. Now, essentially, the idea that platforming and promotion are always the same thing is built on a lie that all publicity is good publicity, which, again, is not true. However, remember the asterisk when I said, platforming does not equal promotion. See, that is a lie that exists with an origin point. And the origin point is this. Because that separation between platforming and promotion only applies when there is an active user of the platform trying to assert this separation. But if you look at the way that these social platforms work, if you look at the way that they're designed, if you look at the way that they're built, there is no distinction between promotion and platforming because they are the platform. So yeah, essentially what happens is this sort of conflation, this absolute overlap between platforming and promotion is the default option when you're using these social platforms. And only when you're actively trying to separate the two do you get a distinction like this. So again, when people assume that platforming and promotion are the same thing, there is a reason for that. And this is that reason. All platforms are designed with this in mind, with the default features being that regardless of whether you're, regardless of how you're platforming something, that will always constitute a promotion. So again, this is how it actually works, but only when there's someone putting in the effort to make this distinction. This is the way things work by default. And I bring this up because the fact that platforms are arranged this way is what gives rise to a lot of the controversy that comes along with these small disagreements or small situations like Smol Lola's. Because, I mean, let's be honest, Smol Lola was doing this with controversy in mind. But, again, this was a controversy that only had legs because of the way that the platforms she was using to promote herself were designed. And this only blew up because, again, and this will be something that I end up saying like a lot in my content, and I've said multiple times before as well. Twitter is a platform that is built on the premise of taking small disagreements, personal circumstances, personal stories, personal interactions, and blowing them all up into a public spectacle. There is a reason why the default option is that anyone can reply to anything you say. There is a reason why, on Twitter in particular, everything has the possibility of becoming a public melee. Again, Twitter is a platform where everyone on it is expected to say something about everything. And that really comes across in the mentality that a lot of people have towards the way that creators and individual users interact with each other on that platform. So, what happens when this is the default option on the social media platform that you are using? How do you deal with this? How do you address this? And the answer is, you refuse to feed into it by calling it out for what it is. This response from ShyLily is, unironically, the perfect response to a controversy like this. If I were to ever make a handbook on how as a small creator, you should deal with controversy, this would be fucking framed, right? So, essentially, I mean, just reading through the response, people are waiting for me to say the wrong thing. I stay out of drama for more reasons than just I have better things to do with myself. Other reasons include that, at some point, you can never say the right thing. What am I expected to address? But since people won't leave me alone about it and even bother my management and message in Twitch chat, I guess I am sadly forced to say at least something. If I speak up against something and reveal that I'm uncomfortable with it, I am just a hater. Big bad wolf. And bear in mind, this isn't said with no context at all. a lot of like Smol Lola's like most adamant defenders, and even Smol Lola herself towards the beginning of this whole situation when it was bubbling up, were really adamant on defending that the people pointing out the similarities were just haters. The second thing that she says, if I state that I'm fine with it, I disrespect the artists who are working hard to practice and hone their skills over years and years, and many more years. Their love, passion, technical skills, and everything else they put into their work, I'll be responsible for setting a new standard that encourages stealing, copying, and plagiarizing as okay to do. I'm not the damn law. So, remember what I said before when I was talking about, how social media has changed the fundamental model that defines how communication works. This is ShyLily pointing out that everything has a peanut gallery nowadays, and that peanut gallery is not only watching what you say, but waiting for you to say something. And by calling it out, she has opened up a third avenue that she can now take, which is to point out this, the way that the situation is arranged, rather than just falling into one of the two options of condone or, decry. So, again, she goes on to say, I'm sad that people have to drag my name into drama and forcing me to say something. The amount of notifications I've been getting is insane to me. Furthermore, we don't condone harassment, never did, never will. The people who do are not ShyLily fans. Stop treating this as if I or my community is anyhow involved. They're drama frogs. Let that be clear. And the reason why this one sentence is so important is because this is something that ShyLily was doing that is in stark contrast to everything that I talked about just then when it comes to Offkai's lack of representation, where ShyLily she's really putting her foot down and making it really clear. This is who represents me. This is not who represents me. And she's drawing a really clear line in the sand between people who are her fans, people who are her community, and people who are just using them as a facade to dogpile onto Smol Lola. And this is something that Pippa did in her response to Offkai's situation as well, where she did call out the fact that there were a lot of people who were masking as kapipis just as an excuse to dogpile on Offkai and its staff. And Pippa as well drew a really clear line in the sand to say, those are not members of my community. Those are people skinwalking my community. My community would not do this. And again, as a creator especially, it is extraordinarily important that you make sure everyone knows who your representatives are and who your community's representatives are. So again, this is, if you were this was already doing a pretty apt job at addressing the situation while really getting at the roots of why it's there in the first place. But this really hammers this is the final nail in the coffin, right? Okay, so all this effort to stay out of it just for people to put words in my mouth and slander my community. You do not speak for me. I have a great fan base that I absolutely love, and people who are familiar with me know that my fan base is drama-free. Anyway, have a nice day. I'm back to spending copious amounts of money on anime waifu PNGs in-game. So, again, when you have a problem, when you're faced with a situation where the medium you're using to communicate to your audience and to other audiences that you haven't even conceived of, when you are confronted with the problem of people expecting you to speak up about something, when you're confronted with the problem of that platform being designed to force you to speak out on something, this is the correct way to do it. Because, again, you don't have a horse in this race. If you... you don't have a horse in this race. You can only ever lose if you take sides in this kind of situation. The best thing to do is to call out the functions of the platform, the expectations of drama farmers for what they are. And again, that's exactly what she's done here. So, if you take away nothing else from this, understand that the game is rigged against you if you're facing these situations. And the only way you can win is by refusing to play and calling out the game for what it is. So,